Anders, I see your request for the screen. I would grant that as soon as we are done with the startup stuff. Which, given that it's 4 o'clock, at least in my time zone, and that it's a new year in which we can do away with old habits, we might just as well start right on the top of the hour now. Hello and welcome everybody to this first interim of the CBOR working group in this new year. My name is Christian Amsus. You're probably all familiar with how this works. I'll show the note well, with which I hope that everyone around here is familiar with anyway, because that's how we work. As usual, the agenda is not really on the slides or in the agenda field, but in the notes. So I would like to ask you to just switch your screens over to the minute taking tool and invite you to contribute to the minutes for anything that Marco will not catch, or just to make sure that this is all a collaborative thing. With that, I would like to briefly go through the things that we would like to talk, that we have on the agenda for today. There are a few items that are not really agenda items, but more placed there for just to be mentioned that they are still around. So for example, time tag won't have any big discussion today, but there is a recent pull request. So anyone who is interested in seeing how this progresses, maybe just have a look there. On the side of
just very quickly, the pull request is technically complete, but we are still debating whether we should make an editorial round to properly structure this into the right sections and so on. So I hope at the end of the day we know that.
Great, thank you. There are no new updates on DNS over CBOR. I've had a few words with Martin previously. This is mainly blocked on the general need to do stuff on the DNS side, so there is no current input that this needs from the working group either. On CDDL 2.0, Carsten, do you want to summarize what you wrote?
So we have a document, we don't have an implementation. I'm actually writing the implementation or an implementation that already does interesting things. Unfortunately, not exactly the things I wanted to do, so it will probably take another week or so until we can start playing with it and starting building an opinion on whether this is the right direction.
I'm looking forward to the playing stuff. Thank you. And then the large agenda point that we will actually talk about today is the CBOR object type extension that Anders is proposing. There is one more point on the agenda, but as I understand the slides that Carsten proposed, they are basically his comments on COTX, or
Exactly.
Anders, do you have a preference of how this is pronounced? But either way, please take it away, Anders. And I see that you are unmuted. I don't hear you yet. So if this is unexpected, please write something.
Did you pull in the slides? So maybe if Anders has a problem with screen sharing, we could.
Slides are pulled in, and that they should be available. Honestly, I didn't check what was requested. It was just a request to grant blah blah, and I didn't read the rest. I don't see anything on the chat.
Okay.
I hope that was you, Anders. I hear you now. If you'd like to share the slides using the PDF you uploaded, you can click on the document icon, which is right next to the raised hand icon to join the queue.
Yeah, I have learned that it's much easier if the chair simply starts the slide sharing and then hands over the controls to the new participant, because
That
these
worked?
icons are all very confusing.
Nice. I wasn't aware that this works, so yep, let's do it that way.
Yeah, no, just go to Anders. Yeah, exactly.
Get this to work. The microphone.
Yes,
Hello,
now,
do you hear me?
hello.
Yes, we
Do
do.
you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
good. Okay, thank
Great.
you. It was not okay. Well, what do you want me to do?
The first slide is on the screen, and you can use the arrow keys to go through the next slide.
Okay, I will arrow keys. Okay. I am on a mobile phone right now. Unfortunately, that's not evident how I control things.
What I can do is I can take control back, and you just tell me when you want to when you want to have the slides advanced.
Okay. Well, the idea behind this is awfully simple. It's that URLs and similar identifiers are sort of a de facto standard in the XML and JSON world, and the idea is bringing this in some way into CBOR. That is the whole idea. And yeah, it's because I see a possibility to switch from XML and JSON to CBOR for essentially any application, and then it is nice if the transition is not too complicated and does not interfere with existing ways of naming objects, and that is essentially URLs. There are certain drawbacks with URLs, but it is still a de facto standard. I don't want to go into a battle about that, since I didn't define those standards like XML and JSON. Okay, that is essentially what the specification itself is very simple. It's just the use of two elements in a wrapped in a standardized JSON CBOR tag. That's all. It's not very space consuming, so it is not in conflict with the goals of this. That is essentially what I have to say about this.
Okay, thank you. With that, I would usually jump into discussion, given that there is a queue item already. Does anyone have a comment who is not Carsten, because Carsten will basically get a big slot right away, right after that? Hearing none, I think, Carsten, you have a few comments. I'm curious about how many of those will hold up to this is what they use. Let's not discuss the applicability, but let's see. Carsten, please.
No, this is interesting because I now have the slide sharing.
Could you just try again? Something obviously slipped up.
I just did, but nothing happens.
Yeah, that's more your
fault. Yeah, so I wrote some slides because, I mean, it's 10 years since CBOR was defined, and it would be surprising if this were a completely new idea that is coming to the CBOR world at this point in time. So the slides I provided explain where we are and why we are where we are. They are not, only the last slide is actually a comment on I also don't know how to pronounce it. I use the Catalan pronunciation, Koch. How this all this thinking applies to Koch. So in 2013, when we started to work on CBOR, we thought that we would need to do two main steps to improve on JSON. One was embracing binary in various ways by having byte strings, by having binary encodings, and so on. So that was a big step, of course, away from the text-based JSON protocol. And the other one was that we really wanted to embrace extensibility or evolution. And that is the domain of the semantic tagging. So that's why we actually put that in. So this has been a great concern in the CBOR community from the start. And let's dive into that. So CBOR tags are essentially the main extension point for CBOR. There is another one, the simple data items, but this extension point has been used very sparingly. So people usually use tags as the extension point. And we have a basic generic data model, which is essentially JSON plus binary. So it addresses the first of the two concerns, but not the second one. And the tags are then used to build the extended generic data model, where we can take some data from the basic generic data model, or maybe even from something that internally uses the extended generic data model, slap a tag on top of that, and express some semantics by putting in a tag. So this is pretty much what Anders is doing with the Koch tag. He's using tags for tagging, which is fine, because that's exactly what the CBOR extension point was designed to do. And since we had this mechanism in place, we used it to define a few slightly less often used data types in CBOR. So that there are some data types in the basic generic data model that are very fundamental. And then there are some that are defined using tags that are in the standard and have been pre-registered with the approval of the first CBOR definition document 7049. How does this tag mechanism work? First of all, to get a new tag, we decided we want to go through an IANA registry. And we wanted to do this because we wanted to have a simple unsigned number, a potentially big number, so we can accommodate 64-bit numbers, but numbers are relatively easy to process, are pretty efficient in the representation. So this is useful for the main target application, the concise binary object representation, where we care about size and efficiency of ingest and generation. So this tag namespace is global. That's the other big decision. So if you compare this with ASN1's tag spaces, ASN1 also has tags, but these are not 64-bit numbers. These are essentially 5 plus 2-bit numbers. So you're a bit constrained in what you can do there. Anyway, ASN1 actually has universal tags, which actually are quite similar to CBOR tags, except that in ASN1 everything has a tag. ASN1 also has application tags where the number space is local to the ASN1 module that you are looking at. So you really need to have the module at hand to understand this tag. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to make sure that CBOR data items can be interpreted even in the absence of a schema document. And then there are private tags which I haven't seen in actual use probably because they are a bad idea. So we didn't copy them. And finally, there are context-specific tags that really mean something only in the specific position in the schema where you are in. And we don't have that in CBOR. We are actually adding a little bit of context specificity to tags, for instance, in CBOR packed. But this is really coming from the globally unique side and getting a little bit local semantics instead of the other way around, like in ASN1. So that's really where CBOR tags are positioned. And that actually is quite similar to the way URI-based semantic tags are often used. These are also often from a global namespace. So we have some similarity here. Of course, we have a difference in that we need to go through a registry and have 64-bit numbers. These numbers come in different ranges. The space is vast, so we are never going to use up all those 2 to the 64 possibilities, but the small tags, of course, are the better tags. Anders, do you want to make a comment?
Well,
I'm not hearing you.
I heard you briefly, and then you were muted again, although not visibly from this side. So could you try again, please?
Maintenant, do you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Okay. It's a little bit complex here with mobile phone. Well, what you said is, of course, completely right. There is no objections to that. And I understand the tag concept pretty well since I have done a CBOR implementation that uses it as well. But this is sort of we could say, a provision for people who are working with high-level systems where you have lots of objects that are constantly revised. That means that you will have many identifiers, and then it becomes slightly less tempting to use IANA for every new identifier, but having a root somewhere. And that is essentially what URL-based identifier gives you. You have a root that is typically a host name, and then you can create your own namespace there. There are some drawbacks with this, but I think that with, let's say, GitHub, which I use currently, you get a stable point for having your own namespace. Of course, you can lose the contact with your account. It's possible, but that is established. And ISO, they have their own URN standard or URN identifier, which is their root. So it addresses this kind of application, which are slightly different than the origins of CBOR. I don't see it as a sort of a deprecation of anything. It is more or less to make things easier for those who work with high-level applications. I do that, and I have lots of objects, and I don't like the idea that I have to register all objects externally, because that would not give me, that would give inflexibility. That's all.
Yeah, I have a slide number 10 with that comes back to this specific thing. So let me just quickly go through the rest of the slides, just to
Okay.
have a
Yeah,
complete picture.
the last page is actually rather interesting. There is already a predecessor, an IETF thing, where you actually do not use a CBOR tag, but a URL, and it could easily be replaced by an empty CBOR tag with a null argument, but they selected a URL anyway. So if my proposal is bad, you could say then the other proposal is bad as well, because they essentially build on the same ID, having URLs and do dereferencing for documentation.
Could you
Yeah,
just please
so-
repeat which thing you were talking about, because I didn't get that, and
We're talking about the RATS EAT
okay, thank you.
specification, where they have a profile URL, which I think is similar to an object identifier, and they say that it typically is a URL and you do dereferencing, and it could definitely be replaced by a CBOR tag, IANA registered with a null argument. That would be sort of the CBOR-like solution for that problem, but they have selected a URL, and yeah, I think they have done it for the same reason as me. They think that it will make it easier for people who want to do lots of profiles and have control over the namespace. You must have that, of course.
Thank you.
That's essentially the motive. So, in my opinion, these proposals have similar difficulties, although I don't really see that the difficulties are that bad. I know that reading schemas online and trying to modify code is a bad idea, and that is also warned for about in the specification. And that is good comments which I got from the CBOR list. It wasn't in the original specification, so I tried to accommodate all the criticisms problems with URL-based identifiers.
So
But I'm sure that somebody will screw up anyway. But that's just another thing.
The EAT profile claim is interesting because it also allows using ASN1 object identifiers,
Yes.
which are another very interesting scheme for generating unique names.
I know.
Because
yes. If you think this is a very good idea, we could of course add that. I think that they've also written that typically it will be a URL, and I am sort of into that. This will address the typical use, not all possible uses. It would simplify the definition.
Yeah, so an OID is actually rooted in some registration mechanism.
Yes.
But then you can go into your private arc and do weird things there.
I know. I think we all know how OIDs work, and it works like this. It is just for the application I am mentioning, the high-level application. They don't use OIDs unless they're actually forced to do that, which it may be if they're using PKI stuff. But otherwise, they use URLs. And this is sort of the heritage of this specification, but of course, it can be expanded with OID as just see it a little bit of overkill, if we could say that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure if you reference EAT profiles, then it's just interesting to see that they seem to believe that OIDs are a good way to do this. I'm not sure about that, but I'm not trying to do good and bad here. I'm just trying to explain where we are.
Yes.
So the tag allocation mechanism is structured into different spaces, different ranges. And here is today's usage report. So of the first range that has 24 potential values, 13 are used and 11 are free. Of the second range, there 30% are used. Of the third range, a very small number are used, which is essentially telling us if only so few are used after 10 years, then we probably have the ability to put in new tags there quite freely. So only the first two ranges actually create an issue whether we want to accept the registration or not. The other ones are quite empty. So the third thing I wanted to point out is there are different policies which don't quite align with the ranges. But the point is that, as I said, 1+2 is pretty empty right now. So this is first come, first served, as are the higher ones and the bigger ones. And I think that's really important to make this tag allocation mechanism available for people who want to get some work done, so they can get a response from IANA quickly. This is about as easy as getting a PIN number or something like that. While the lower half of 1+2 and 1+0 and 1+1 are curated, so that there are different people looking at this and trying to make sure that we don't expand them too early at a limited rate. So let's just look at a few other places, and I certainly will add it to that when I make a new version of the slide deck. Let's look at a few cases. So JSON-LD is an interesting case because they are essentially trying to do something like semantic tagging in the JSON space. And of course, JSON does not have extensibility, so they have to essentially steal a specific case, JSON object or map that has a key called add type. Yeah, so that is used for carrying the type information. And then there are additional things like context information. I think we just lost Anders. So this is one way of doing things, doing this in a non-transparent way. So you cannot use add type for anything else that might have wanted to use this map key. When add type is used anywhere in your JSON data, then you are making a statement about the type of something. This has URIs as namespace and has all the typical problems of dereferenceable identifiers. In the notes, I have put a link to a document that explains dereferenceable identifiers. And if you have comments on that document, I would really like to get them and make sure the document is as good as possible. Anyway, so JSON-LD is one case study here. Another case study is RFC 9290, the concise problem details, which we did over in the core working group. So here we had an existing XML JSON spec 7807, which is in the BIS process right now. So I'm not going to try to be too precise about this because it's changing as we speak. But this doesn't try to be general, but provide one specific data structure, the problem details data structure, and that's a map or a JSON object, and has certain predefined keys, but also allows application-specific keys, and it uses a URI reference in the type key. So this is again a place where URIs are being used. And 7807 BIS has changed this a little bit by actually defining a registry. So you can register your URI and make sure that is well known and findable and so on. So I think that it would be interesting to see why they actually added the registry after the fact to this. In core, we try to come up with a concise version of these problem details, so we can have problem details in a few bytes. And here we replaced URIs again with an IANA registry with integers, but also providing a URI as a fallback for a worst case. So I think that's also interesting. Yeah, and the Anders draft is essentially another entry in this picture. And this is interesting because it actually says it uses text strings. It only hints that these text strings might usefully be URIs, but it also allows other text strings there. And that, of course, has the advantage that it's easy to come up with text strings. It's even easy to come up with URIs. It's less clear how you can do a reasonable collision avoidance regime on these. So for URIs that require some confidence that the owner of the domain name is not going to change the meaning of that URI, and so on. It's easy to break this if you don't think about these things. There's a tag URI scheme that is actually good for getting better collision avoidance here. And yeah, the difference between this and the CBOR native tag system is that the native tag system comes with CBOR, is well implemented. It has an easy registration mechanism and a working collision avoidance mechanism. And yeah, the disadvantage is you can't just make up text strings. So yeah, looking at Koch as tag registration request, because it actually uses the CBOR tag system to put itself up in the CBOR type system. So that's the right thing to do, of course. This is a valid registration request, but I haven't heard anybody question that. So the registry can handle this registration request. No working group action is required here. But I thought it would be useful to make these slides to indicate to provide a little bit more background here. There are two designated experts who both are in this meeting, but I'm speculating here because I'm only one of them. In the past, we have accepted internet drafts as documents for the specification required requirement, which we have in the tags under 32,000. And yeah, I think that is obvious here as well. And of course, it's nice if that internet draft becomes an RFC at some point, but it's not a prerequisite to registration. And the other thing the designated experts are likely to say is that URIs are already big, so spending another byte for the tag is not going to hurt. And so the 1+2 space is appropriate. So the one thing that irks me is that the text around this registration is trying to explain that the CBOR tagging system is deficient because it cannot do all the things that this thing can do. And yeah, in ice skating, there used to be a scoring system where you had a technical score and a presentation score, B-Note in German. Yeah, there are certain reductions in the presentation score here, but that's not for the designated experts to act on. So that's my summary of where we are with this. Okay. So I would ask Anders to maybe explain a little bit more of this. But yes, this registration request will go through.
Let me just very briefly, Anders, before you comment here, weigh in as the second designated expert that I generally agree with your comments on what designated experts would say. And that indeed things like the presentation are out of scope of us as designated experts, but we might have comments on that too.
Sure. I switched to a PC. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Very well, yes.
Oh, fine. Great. All right. Well, of course, I can, if it looks like I am trying to replace native tags, it is an addition to the CBOR system. It's not a replacement. And it is just to align it with other things like verified credentials, ISO 20022 and similar systems that currently use URLs, URIs, or URNs. That is what the purpose is, to not force these people into something else, even if this something else is better. Otherwise, this transaction may not happen. Transformation going to CBOR will not happen. That is the risk. And I want it to happen. I think it would be a nice upgrade to actually get away from XML and JSON. So you should see this as good intent.
Okay, are there any questions from not Anders and not me?
I'd be curious if there are, especially if there are other CBOR users in the room who have encountered a situation where they would have used where their CBOR users would have worked well with a URI-based tag. Not that it will be a prerequisite for anything here, just to kind of spool experiences.
Well, I don't know really. I just seen this EAT standard where you use URLs instead of tags, and so this is the only thing I know of. That you actually could fool the system, I don't know really. I aren't system based on tables where you have sort of known identifiers regardless of what typing system you use. You don't accept all kinds of objects, probably a set of objects. And if somebody comes with an object with a tag you don't recognize, you reject it. So I guess this is a pretty universal idea. I use table-driven systems, and that works fine, in my opinion.
Chris?
Yeah, so I don't know that. So I'm an author on the common access token that is being developed elsewhere, but it's using CBOR and CWT. And one of the things that we have discovered is that we occasionally run into situations where we have an alternate. We have alternate types that can be chosen. So, for example, we have a match thing where you have multiple ways to match a string, and the tag system feels totally appropriate for that.
I see.
But the scope of those tags would probably be just dedicated to this particular context, right? Just this match operation. And so rather than registering a tag, because tags are universal, we do exactly what's presented here in the codex, where we present an array where the first element of the array tells you what the rest of the array is supposed to look like. And that feels like it doesn't meet with CBOR's typical elegance, and it wastes a few bytes. And in our context, a few bytes is actually kind of a big deal. And so I don't totally love it, but it does work. And so I don't know that has any impact on what we do here with contacts, but it is another data point.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Thanks for that. Are you aware of the? Unfortunately, I don't know the precise name of my head of the draft that has been around, of the proposal that has been around for tags that that could be used for enums, because these would register precisely those tags where you have a small number of known by the context options that an item can have. I can look up the precise name and add it to the minutes later.
Yeah, I vaguely recall that, but I don't remember the specific name. I would be interested in that, although it may not necessarily be available early enough for me to use in the work that I'm working on now.
Any more comments?
Well, I'm just wondering, didn't we already register the enum thing?
Quite possibly. I'd have to look it up really.
Yeah, I can't find it at the moment. I'm sorry.
I've made an action item for myself to add this to the notes before I publish them. If there are no further comments, then what I suggest is that that everyone interested in this have a look at the COTX proposal. Add to the mailing list thread comments on particulars where it may be good to adjust the text, and in parallel, there is nothing that would stop at any point in time a request for registration here. Yep, I think this can go. This should be able to progress in a reasonable time frame.
Okay, who is handling the registration?
The registration will be handled basically by you sending an email to if I'm not mistaken, that registration would happen by you sending an email to Ayana, asking for the assignment of a tag.
Okay.
If you have a suggestion for a particular tag, preferably in the 1+2 range, because otherwise I think this would be excessive on future applications that might make better use of the 1+1 range. Then Ayana will forward this request to Karsten and me.
Okay.
And yeah, basically as independently of any comments that we have on the list, we can process this on the plain side, on the plain aspect of, is this well described and a good use of a CBOR tag, which I think it is, and then that number can be assigned.
Okay, fine. Great.
Yeah, there actually is a form that you are supposed to fill in. I sent the pointer to the form to the chat. Can you see that?
Right now, I don't see anything.
I'm also adding it to the notes.
Good.
Okay. If there are no more comments and questions on the topic of the COTX, we have two general items on the agenda that are always at the end. One is that after the IETF is before the IETF. There is a meeting upcoming in spring. I don't see anything coming up for the agenda there, but if you have anything, you may just let the chairs know. Is there any other business that anyone would like to bring up?
Chris just helped me find the registration for the alternatives. So that takes 101, 121 to 127, and 1280 to 1400 are reserved, allocated for that.
Thank you. Okay. With that, I think we can call it a day. Thank you, everyone, for the discussion and the input.
Thank you very much.
If you have any agenda for in 2 weeks, please put it on the in the notes for that meeting again, and see you there. Have a nice evening or have a nice day. Goodbye.
You too.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.